Sure, they'll have to wait, maybe just a few more days or weeks, anytime now. So swiftvotingamerica.com is where you can find all the information on it. This is a really kind of a long project that wasn't supposed to be a book in the first place. I was just a lawyer. I wasn't involved with any of this Russiagate stuff and so on. I wasn't even particularly political. I mean, it's just sort of stuff that happened. I guess like many of us, right? We all went through this sort of after Trump. We all kind of started, or many of us started going through these kinds of motions. For me, it was the Papadopoulos case, which was really the first of these Trump cases. And it was just very obvious that this guy was being charged for stuff that, he hadn't done. That just didn't happen. And it was just such an odd thing. So that was kind of my door into this world. I wasn't on, I think I had a Twitter, but I never used it. I mean, I wasn't connecting with anyone. I was just kind of doing my thing. I was just a civilian, right? And then, I connected with people like Steve McIntyre online and all these other fantastic researchers like Fool Nelson and Walker Fire and Technofog. And, there's so many others, Jeff Carlson, of course. Yeah. And, we all kind of collaborated in our own time, on our own dime. It was kind of just a very organic thing. And more, we uncovered all these bits and pieces of that Russiagate story because it's a huge story. And it really culminated in 2020 with the discovery of the Christopher Steele's so-called primary subsource, his super source, the guy who was responsible for all this information. He knew about the P-tape and Trump collusion and all this one guy. And then we discovered that this one guy, he isn't even some guy in Moscow or whatever. He's just a guy in Washington, D.C. at the Brookings Institution. The whole thing was a transparent hoax. And anyway, so many things happened over the years that at some point I just thought, well, I should kind of write this down. At first, I just wanted to do an academic article because that's what I do and what I did in the sort of the legal academic world. And then it just kind of grew into something bigger. And now it's a book, and it kind of details, the whole story of Russiagate as told through the perspective of one of those people, me, who uncovered some of this stuff. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And you're absolutely right. There are lots of landmines being planted with the specific goal of discrediting, the entire movement. Right. I saw that, to be honest, I saw it early on before, Twitter blew up into the big thing that it is now. And before Twitter was monetized. Unfortunately, that's created a lot of bad incentives as well, where people just post trash just because they want to get tens of thousands of views and then they get paid for it. It started with, again, going back to Papadopoulos and some of the early beginnings of this whole Russiagate thing, that there were just false stories out there, in particular about Papadopoulos. It was a bunch of false stories. Some of them came from him. I'm not sure what the idea there was, but it always struck us. And when I say us, it's sort of that smaller group around Steve McIntyre, Jeff Carlson, and a few others. And we struck us that every time someone puts out a false story about, say, this mysterious professor, Mifsud, something just wrong. That gets put out. And then, a few weeks later, you'd see something in the media that basically discredits the whole thing and then blames, Trump fans, MAGA fans, whatever, for putting that stuff out. So that's been around for a long time, that sort of phenomenon that basically bad information gets shared. And then the media comes and, to use one of their words, they come and pounce. And then the entire movement is discredited. So always be aware. I mean, there was one recent one where there was a hoax involving Kamala. It was a transparent hoax. There was some video about, some hit and run or whatever it was. And just little things, they had a TV station that supposedly it was showing the clip of this. Well, just look for the name of the TV station. That's the first thing I did, and it doesn't exist. It was a hoax TV station. It doesn't. Just at that point, it's not true. So just look for little clues. Just do a 5-second search, a 10-second search, and then more often than not, this is not true. In this case, it was completely false. In many cases, it's, we don't know, or we don't know yet. And then, of course, you have the 48-hour rule. Let's just wait and see what happens. So there's a lot we can do. And of course, another one is just beware of who are the these people on X or on Twitter who do the content harvesting, the monetization, where they just kind of try and get as many views as possible. There's a few names. After a while, you become familiar with who they are, and then whatever these people say, just treat it, very carefully. Yeah. To watch it, right? This is Eric Weinstein, so he's probably lesser well known. His brother, Brett Weinstein, he was big on COVID. He was sort of one of these voices out there who, I didn't agree with everything he said over the past few years, but, he said a lot of the truthful stuff that, you wouldn't hear anywhere else. And he had a science background, so he knew this stuff quite well. And so his brother, he's also been on the scene, but kind of less so. So this is Eric. And he went on a show, I think it was with a British guy, and had a very, very interesting conversation, the two of them did. And the hook of that video, the thing that sort of captured everyone's attention is that Eric Weinstein said that they may not allow Trump to be president again. That was the statement. And of course, everyone goes, whoa. And then the interviewer also goes, well, what do you mean by that? And of course, who is they? That's the sort of operative part.
Right.
So then, and I'm not trying to criticize Eric Weinstein at all. I thought what he said was brilliant. It was fantastic. It was a fantastic explanation as to why we do not have a proper democracy. And I'm not talking about this republic versus democracy thing and so on. I always find that discussion a bit, tedious in a way, because everyone kind of thinks they know what the idea of democracy is. You go and vote, and then you select whoever most people want to have as president, or, as whatever the position is you're voting for. So he wasn't talking about that distinction. He was talking about the fact that the system limits our choices, and has done for 100 plus years. That was the essence of it. And not only in the US, but he talked mainly about the US. So the system kind of weeds out any people who might be problematic to the system. And then you end up with these two choices, and the system is happy because all the choices are kind of shades of gray of some kind, but no one's going to really rock the boat. It's not gonna, so you can go back and just look at all the candidates, whether it was going to be Romney or Obama, the world order is not going to change. No one's going to start questioning NATO, and no one's going to start questioning, broader aspects of geopolitics, as well as domestic, many other things, the institutions, the Defense Department, the State Department, and all these things that kind of have a life of their own. So, don't want to rock the boat. The system wants to maintain all these things, both domestic and international. So it weeds out all these people who might be problematic, the Bernie Sanders on the left, even though I don't think he's truly rebellious at all, but that's a different discussion. But it meant to weed out people like Trump on the right. Okay, that's the idea. Well, let's get back to Weinstein on that, because that was really kind of his point, even though he didn't quite finish it. And that's sort of there's still this big open question. So the stakes are extremely high. And the reason the stakes are so high, and I agree with Weinstein, is because the system doesn't want people like Trump. Right. And so once ever in the entire history of the country, there was one instance where one of these candidates got through. It wasn't supposed to happen. That was Trump. That was in 2016. And so his theory is that the system won't allow it to happen again. It just simply cannot happen again, because you cannot have someone who rocks the boat. Like, for instance, you mentioned all these China scandals. Absolutely. But the system doesn't care about that, because China is a partner. You need it for all the globalization, and you need it for for your inputs and for all your products. And you want to have that whole system being maintained. That's sort of the idea. And so you can't have Trump, because Trump, he may or may not disrupt the system, but there's a risk he might. And with all the other candidates, that's not going to happen. So that's essentially his point. And I completely agree. Therefore, the election is hugely, hugely important. But then we get to the main issue again. What does Weinstein mean they won't allow it? He basically said, we can all vote for Trump. We can do whatever we want. They won't allow it. What does that mean? And then this gets to the unspoken part, or the unanswered part, which is, well, who is they? Yeah, isn't it that kind of runs against this theory of maintaining a system? Because certainly what's happened with Russia kind of goes against that.
Right.
You mentioned the financial system was completely unprecedented in 2022 when the Ukraine war. Well, it didn't start; it escalated. It actually started in 2014, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
What happened is that all these Western financial institutions actually excluded Russia from the SWIFT system, which is the system for sending money, across borders. Totally unprecedented, and they kind of thought that's going to be like the kill switch. They can achieve something huge with that, and of course that didn't happen. Russia is prospering.
Right.
Of course, the other thing that happened is that Russia got pushed right into China's arms, and they're best friends now, even though they were historically, not always best friends. So, in that sense, whatever the system is, it didn't do very well because that is truly disruptive.
Yeah.
That is disruption that even Trump, well, I shouldn't say even, that Trump did not cause, and Trump would not have caused. Russia would not have been like, the arch enemy, which of course brings with it lots and lots of other consequences. So I completely agree with you. That's where our focus should be. It should be on the escalation of war, not only in Russia, Ukraine, but, elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Financial system, and the role of China. I mean, you mentioned here that all the Chinese spying and so on, it's tolerated among, people in the system, as we mentioned, because, well, China is the sort of the factory of the world. That's where all the stuff gets manufactured. We need China for all our inputs and for raw materials, certain types, and various other things. There's so much investment. The list goes on and on and on. Well, they're not good. They're not a competitor. So, but the system wants to see them as such. So there are some inconsistencies in what's going on right now because China is being exposed more and more as, not being that great. And I don't think that's what the system intended. Remember COVID and where COVID came from. We weren't allowed to talk about that, the system. Again, I'm not happy with that because there are, human agents behind that. There is human agency. There's human actors. And we can get a bit more into who they are.
Yeah.
But without a doubt, when COVID arrived, that was another example of the thing that Eric Weinstein was talking about. He didn't mention it specifically, but that's one of them where the system decides, no, we're not allowed to talk about that because that's 20 million deaths. That's $30 trillion. And that would really rock the boat if we held China to account. So let's not do that. Yeah, all of those are perfect examples, again, of the system. Hunter Biden can't have that because we don't talk about that generally, and then specifically because then, that would help Trump. But yes, when Trump is concerned, we can't just go and arrest political candidates. No, we can't do. And you see all these headlines where they make fun of Venezuela. They just arrested the opposition leader.
Right.
And then the system, I just use that word for lack of a better word. You can use so many different words, deep state, whatever. Again, I think we ought to talk more about who those actual people are, because ultimately we're not a colony of bees or ants or whatever, where everything is automatic. It might be for a lot of people, but ultimately there are human beings who do control these things. I think we need to talk more about those people. But,
go ahead.
Yeah, before we do that, I mean, so the system, DC, the deep state, whatever, makes fun of Venezuela. Oh, they just arrested their opposition leader. Hello. They seem completely oblivious to what they're doing because within the system, Trump isn't part of it. So it's okay to do that. It's like you wouldn't do it to Biden, obviously, or you wouldn't do it to Kamala or to Romney or McCain or whatever, but it's Trump, right? So it's just like, it's incredible, isn't it? That the hypocrisy, sometimes it appears to me as if they're not even aware of it. Right. I mean, Kamala's only private sector experience in her entire lifetime apparently was working at McDonald's during the summer holidays. And then it turns out that wasn't true either. So neither of them have any, which is absolutely astonishing. I mean, it's just, again, this idea of how much sort of importance is attached to public service. Oh, he's been a public servant or whatever.
Right.
Well, Joe Biden has been a public servant for 50 whatever years. Well, let's look at what that actually means. That just means they've been living, off of the public purse for all this time and haven't created any jobs, and haven't created any money, and haven't done much at all. So, Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I do think she's probably going to get away with not talking to the media at all. It's like she had that one very scripted interview, and that seems to be it. And the problem, of course, is that no one, or not, that there are so many people, no one on the Democrat side questions these things. Like, no one thinks for themselves anymore. I think Robert Kennedy's running mate, Nicole Shanahan, she had a really good ad the other day that she put out where it was like, it was meant to look like
derangement syndrome.
Yeah, it was meant to look like an ad for some pharmaceutical product, and exactly, it was it was called Independence. That was the thing you could buy, the medication. And then it had all the things about what your symptoms, and of course it recounted, well, if you can't think for yourself, if you just believe what the media says and so on, well, then you definitely have the symptoms for, getting this remedy. But then at the end, it warned that some people, you got to ask your doctor if you are a candidate for this. And obviously Democrats are not. Now, we're laughing about this, but this is actually, it was a fantastic ad, by the way. It was very, very creative, but we're laughing about it, but it's really, really sad, because what it means is that, you've got at least half the country who've just lost the ability to think for themselves. Oh, I completely agree. I mean, let's take Musk for an example. Musk was, he supported Biden in 2020, which by any objective standard was a terrible choice. Even back then, I mean, we were all saying, and we could all see it in front of our eyes, that the guy was already falling apart. But it wasn't only that. It was, we could see that he had not achieved anything in 50 years in DC. We could see how nasty he was. Just think of the Clarence Thomas stuff and so on. But there was a long, long history of all this stuff. So we knew this guy was going to be terrible. Nothing surprising about it. And yet Elon Musk supported this guy. So I think generally these people are not particularly wise about these kinds of things. Maybe they don't follow them enough or so, even though I would have said in 2020, in case of Biden, it was pretty obvious. He's a smart guy. So maybe, and this is another option here, he did recognize that Biden isn't great, but he's just not a Trump fan. And I did always sense that there was something between the two of them that wasn't quite, didn't have that kind of synergy. That was my feeling anyway at the time.
Right.
So for Elon to now come around and have become a Trump fan or Trump supporter, or whatever you want to call it, is huge. And I agree with you that the only reason that makes sense is that he's not interested about, his own, bank account or this or that or whatever. He's truly interested in the survival of the nation.
Yeah.
And he can see it fall apart. And obviously buying Twitter or X was a very, very strange move. It just doesn't fit with, what this guy was doing up until that point in time. And he overpaid and on and on and on. But again, to me, it tells me how much he truly understands the meaning of freedom of speech. And so now I think he recognized that, or since, in the past few years, he recognized that Biden, the Democrats, Kamala, they're all very, very, very bad for freedom of speech and many, many other things. But as I said, he would have been for Trump in 2020 if it had just been purely about economic stuff, but he wasn't. So, it's more than that. As for the others, the Reid Hoffmans and so on, I don't know. I mean, I wish it was just that they're ignorant, but I don't think it is. I think it's often something, far more nefarious about these people. Oh, it is. It's certainly meant for us. It's kind of a trial run. I don't think that was necessarily by design. I always think back to the year 2000. Bill Clinton was president, and the big discussion back then was whether China would be allowed into the World Trade System. Right. And so up until then, that wasn't the case. And then they had just founded the WTO, a new organization, and is China going to be part of it or not? And Bill Clinton, certainly, part of the system, came out and he genuinely, I'm very sure, said that, no, this is a good thing because by bringing them into the system, they're going to open up. And one thing that he said in particular, and he emphasized, was the internet, because he saw that the internet was going to bring democracy and transparency and accountability and all those things. And I actually believe that he did think that at the time. Mm-hmm. So now you skip ahead, 2 decades or so, and it turns out the exact opposite is true. Right. China taught the rest of the world how the internet is actually far more powerful at suppression of civil liberties than it is at promoting civil liberties. because you're always going to have this imbalance. Yes, as an individual, we have access to far more stuff than we ever had before. That is true. But, and here's the other side of that ledger, the government has far, far, far more information on all of us and on trends and on all kinds of stuff than it ever had before. And we can never win that, that imbalance there. So, I think that's what China taught, and China taught everyone very specifically how to use the internet for all these authoritarian purposes. And I'm pretty sure that's coming. I mean, you just had this discussion in Brazil. We're definitely going in that direction when they shut down Twitter, shut down X, and then they shut down the VPNs, which you could have used to access the sites which you can't use. Well, in China, you can't use VPN. Everything is completely blocked and banned, and they just kind of firewalled the whole thing. Right. And I kind of see that's the road we're unfortunately heading toward. At some point, they're going to make up some excuse as to why you can't have VPNs. You need to be There's actually a lot of countries in the world where you're not allowed to have VPNs, but I think that's going to be one of the things on the horizon.
Yeah, I think if we're not
control. It is, and we haven't even talked about the sort of the hidden effects of all this, which are probably even more nefarious than anything else we've talked about so far. So yeah, sure. I mean, they can go and arrest Elon Musk or whatever, but I think that's the smaller thing compared to the effect they've already had by putting in jail people like Peter Navarro.
Yeah,
like Peter Navarro is like, you couldn't come across a more genuine, just this academic type. He does his economic stuff. He's quite leftist, actually. When you read his books. But he was there with Trump from day one, and then they put him in jail on just a ridiculous thing. So, and now he's out there, and a lot of people will say, well, he just spent a bit of time in jail, whatever, it's fine. But it's the effect that has on people's mindsets across the board. Right. I don't want to be like Peter Navarro, therefore I will now keep my mouth shut. Right. You can probably count millions and millions of people who fit into that category. And that, to me, is far more nefarious than everything else put together. That's the real, not only danger. I mean, we're already right there. Yeah. And they tried it with Trump, obviously. I agree with you. We're coming up here to the sort of mid-September. We don't know what's going to happen. I agree with you. They're probably going to try and put him in jail just, for a night, just again to send that message. Right. But you remember how they basically criminalized just being associated with him? First, with the Russiagate, they tried to, block away anyone who was associated with him and his campaign. Yeah. And then after January 6th, they tried it with literally, his lawyers, his advisors, anyone whatsoever. So to be honest, it's a sign of the man's kind of just incredible power of personality, that he kind of persevered, and that there's still all these people who haven't given up and who are, as strong as ever. I find that part maybe part of the most fascinating thing about Trump of all, because of all the messages sent. Like, if you associate with this guy, we will take away your law license. We will lock you up. We will bankrupt you. We will. Well, they're still going strong. So I found that pretty amazing. But it obviously the damage is being done. We can't, just because Trump has this amazingly huge personality where he just kind of carries everything, doesn't mean that the damage is not being done. There's a lot of people out there who are not going to speak up because they don't want to end up like Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon and so on. You have to deal with it, absolutely. And unfortunately, you have this 5-year time limit, which is the statute of limitations, which means that you can't bring charges if you haven't brought them within 5 years of whenever something happened. Right. So we've already come up to a lot of these deadlines, and they've all passed, with a lot of these characters struck, and all the people you mentioned. There are, however, some which have not hit yet. So 2020 was a very big year for Russiagate. It was a lot of revelations. Of course, it was the COVID year, but in the background, a lot of like Danchenko and what was going on there and so on. There was a lot of stuff that came out. So 2020, of course, means 5 years, means 2025. So there's a little bit of time. So I have actually been writing about this on Twitter as well, where sort of reminding myself and others that if and when Trump comes in, there's a very short period of time to hold people to account, because otherwise the 5 years will expire. So 2020 is kind of the last point for the Russiagate stuff, where there were really huge revelations. COVID as well. You had Fauci did some, he lied in 2020, late 2020. So again, you have a 5 years to sort of go after him. But I wanted to come back to all the names you mentioned, because this is a very important point to me. And it's kind of how we started off with, the system polices itself, and the system doesn't like people like Trump and so on. But ultimately, the system, that's just but they are human beings, and there's human agency. And I'm so glad you mentioned all these people, like, for instance, Brennan, because ultimately those are the people responsible. Now, I don't think there's not a Blofeld, somewhere in a dark cave or whatever, pulling the strings. That's not the case.
No.
But by talking about the system so much, we do forget that there are real people doing some really bad things. Not one at the top who does pulls all the strings, no. But there are people on various levels, usually higher levels, but on the vertical, in different agencies, in different roles, doing these things. And Fauci is obviously one of them, for sure, on the whole COVID side. And he pulled a lot of strings. So if you're looking for truly responsible people, he's one. And on the Russiagate side, I completely agree with you. It's not Obama, it's not Comey, it's not Clapper, it's Brennan. I don't think it's so much destruction, but I think control. There's certainly a huge drive among, again, for lack of a better word, the system, to control everyone. And, we talked about China earlier. They've shown the way how to do it. You mentioned financial. This is we haven't talked about this yet in terms of the internet. Is probably one of the biggest parts of it, where you can control all financial transactions. Right. You get rid of cash. Everything is online. You see what Trudeau did. There was some truckers who they just had a protest about vaccine mandates for truckers. That's a very narrow issue. Very personal to them, obviously. What did Trudeau do? He shut down all their bank accounts. That means their bills couldn't get paid, their kids' stuff, their utilities, on and you ruin people's lives, and you change people's behavior very, very quickly that way. And that's a huge danger, of course. Internet, we talked about earlier, is great in many ways, but is also very, very dangerous in many other ways. Now, as to Trump and whether he's going to appoint those kinds of people, I don't know. I mean, he seems to have now admitted that, he made a bunch of blunders when it came to people. I mean, I always think back when we talk about China, when we talk about COVID and so on, Mnuchin persuaded Trump not to have a presidential commission on the origin of COVID, which Trump had already arranged. And Mnuchin and Kudlow as well. Larry Kudlow was was the other one. By the way, we know this through Peter Navarro. Well, they pushed very hard for this not to happen. Of course, Mnuchin has all his China connections and so on. So how did Trump allow that to happen? It's frustrating. But I think, Kamala talks about being unburdened, right? Well, the only person who could possibly be truly unburdened is Trump, because it's the second time around. He's learned. There's not going to be a third time because he'll be barred from running again. So he can truly do what he thinks he should do, what's right, and he can just ignore all those people who come for jobs, and where he's trying to be nice because he has to sort of be diplomatic about stuff. Hopefully he can cast all that aside, as I said, unburdened, and then do the right thing. Yeah. Will it happen? I don't know. I mean, he still talks to Maggie Haberman. He hasn't learned that lesson, or at least
you imagine.
Yeah, you can. Well, you can pre-order it. It should literally be out any day now. So everything's ready. The cover, the proofs, everything's done. It's just I don't know when exactly the publishers will actually put it out, but hopefully within the next few days. So you can go for that. You can go to swiftboatingamerica.com. And you can just drop us just there's a pre-order button there. And you can follow me on X, Twitter at Hans Mahncke, which is HANSMAHNCKE. And cool. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come on. It's always great.
Thank you.
You're right. Yeah, no, we, for years we've been kind of publishing things here and there, and, doing various things, Russiagate, origin of COVID, many other topics. And, we finally took the leap, and now we've kind of pooled everything. Everything we do is now pooled on one site, which is called truthovernews.org. So everything, podcasts, videos, articles, old articles, new articles, it's all there.